Okay, well, we're back here at the Methane Pavilion, fast on the heels of a very stirring rollout of the methane partnership, global partnership here at the COP26. And I'm very pleased to have Tim Gould, Chief Economist of the International Energy Agency, joining us here in the Methane Pavilion.
Thanks very much.
Tim, the International Energy Agency has long been concerned about methane emissions associated with the oil and gas industry. You've done a number of reports on this, and I know that one just came out maybe about a month ago.
That's right.
So maybe you want to just, for those folks who haven't had a chance to dive into it yet, maybe you could just give us some top-line thoughts on the significance of methane for the industry.
Well, thanks very much, Mark. I mean, it's been a huge day for methane abatement. We've just come now from the launch, as you said, of the global Methane Pledge. I mean, huge credit to the US and the EU for giving it the momentum that it needs.
Absolutely.
And I think huge credit to you at EDF for, in a sense, just reminding us constantly of the importance of this issue in the, for warming, for abatement, this opportunity that there is. Now, the pledge, of course, is much broader than energy, but at the IEA, we really firmly believe that it's the energy industry that has to step up, because that's where the most cost-effective abatement opportunities are. And even in advance of seeing what the pledge might look like, we were interested at IEA to try and think through what would a really concerted effort by countries and companies around the world to reduce methane emissions look like. And we took a bit of inspiration when thinking that through from this net zero roadmap that the IEA produced earlier this year. So that net zero roadmap relies on dramatic reductions in CO2, but it also relies on a 75% cut this decade from methane emissions from the energy sector. Now, just to put that in a little bit of context relative to the things we've heard about today on the Global Methane Pledge.
Right.
Global Methane Pledge, 30% all sources of methane emissions from human activity, 30% reduction this decade. We were talking about a 75% reduction from energy-related methane emissions. So if you were to achieve that 75% reduction in energy-related emissions, that would get you most of the way towards that 30% reduction.
So this is really, and the energy sector is really the low-hanging fruit.
I think it has to be seen that way. So that if you do what you can in the energy sector, you get like 25% reductions in all emissions from human activity.
Well,
therefore, we really have to see the energy sector as central to this effort. So what we wanted to do is to think through what are the different components of that, and there are essentially four things that need to happen. First of all, those countries that have taken on commitments need to make good on them. And in our view, there are proven ways from a policy perspective that can help to achieve those goals. So the things that we highlight in the analysis are, equipment standards that reduce leaks from equipment that's in essence designed to leak. So there are ways to counter that. You need to tackle non-emergency flaring and venting. That's extremely important component of this. And the other element that is, again, tried and tested is leak detection and repair programs. So we think that those three, if you can get those implemented in the countries that have signed up for ambitious targets, you can already achieve a great deal. So that's primarily in the oil and gas sector.
So therefore, it's really pretty much some basic stuff. I think in one of your earlier studies, you talked about the fact that all of this is basically technology that's available to the industry today. I mean, there have been innovations in how we monitor and measure methane, but the basic work of fixing leaks, that's pretty simple stuff.
We certainly believe so. And it's not just that it's simple, it's extremely cost effective. Because the nature of these actions is that for the oil and gas industry, you're capturing additional gas that can be marketed in many cases, and the value of that additional gas is often greater than the cost of the abatement measure. So these things come at no net cost in many instances. So in our view, at today's gas prices, I mean, who knows, maybe the whole lot is cost effective, but I mean, under normal circumstances, if you take an average gas price for the last few years, then, you know, almost half of those opportunities are really, there's no economic rationale for holding back. Even without carbon pricing, you know, it just makes sense from an economic perspective.
But so, but let me also make sure that I understand this point as well. I mean, so you're talking about the significance of reducing methane emissions from the oil and gas sector as being really essential to not only meeting this global pledge, but really essential to achieving a net zero energy system. But what I also hear you saying is that methane reductions by themselves aren't enough. Correct? When you do your net zero scenario, you're talking about much more than just methane reductions. Is that right?
I think you cannot see this as separate somehow from the discussion on CO2. But as I think people are aware, these are different types of gases. They have different impacts on warming. You really have to tackle them in parallel. But I think the key element from our side is just to make sure people are aware that when it comes to the energy sector, this is the lowest of low-hanging fruit. It's simple relative to some of the other stuff that needs to be done.
Yeah.
It's often cost-effective, and we cannot see any reason why countries or companies wouldn't make this a high priority when considering the environmental impact of the things that the energy sector.
And before we came on camera, Tim, you and I were talking about how wonderful this pledge is, but we were already beginning to talk about what do we need to do next to make sure that there's follow through. And I know that IEA has put a fair amount of resources into developing something called Methane Tracker. Maybe you want to talk a little bit about what that is and whether you see that as a potential opportunity to help with now getting on with the business of actually making these reductions.
So when we approach this issue, I mean, like everyone else, we see that there's a lack of data for baseline calculations of emissions, in many cases of methane emissions. And so what we wanted to do is try to put together our best understanding of where methane emissions are, oil and gas methane emissions in different countries around the world, and not just where those emissions come from in the oil and gas value chains, but which technologies you need to think about using in order to get them to reduce them. So that's what you find in our methane tracker. And then there's another element to it. So when we talk to countries around the world, we sometimes got the feedback to say, well, look, we would like to be doing more, but it's not just the data that's an issue. Can you explain to us a little bit what other countries are doing? So what are the policy and regulatory approaches that are proven? What are the things that have worked in different countries? And they might vary according to the structure of the industry, but just give us some more information. So what we try to do is build up a sort of inventory of all the stuff that's happening on methane emissions from a policy and regulatory perspective around the world, and just say, well, here it is. These are your options. These are the advantages and disadvantages of different types of approaches. And if you wanted to tackle this issue seriously, this is the sorts of things you need to be thinking about. This is the sequencing of your actions. This is the stuff that's proven to be effective in different jurisdictions around the world.
And I guess maybe we should have started the conversation this way, but there may be some people who don't really even understand necessarily the International Energy Agency, who you are,
Yeah.
and what you do. So maybe you want to talk a little bit about that, because I think once you explain that, the idea that you have the ability to talk with the energy ministries around the world, I think will become, it'll become much more real to people what you're talking about here.
Oh, so thanks very much, Mark. So we're an intergovernmental organization. We act as a sort of energy advisor to our member countries, but also to all sorts of countries around the world on the steps that can be taken to move to a safer and more secure and more sustainable energy system. And so we provide data, we provide advice, we provide an environment where countries can come together and learn what works, what doesn't in different contexts. So that's all aspects of energy. But clearly we're paying a huge amount of attention to emissions as well, how we can get to that net zero emission system that we need. And that's what draws us into this discussion about methane emissions as well.
Well, and again, I mean, you have you individually and your team and your director, Fatih Birol, literally have the ear of just about every energy minister around the world. And oftentimes countries come to you not just for information, but for guidance and advice. So the fact that you can now talk to them about methane abatement, I think is just a tremendous opportunity for being able to advance the substance of what this pledge today is all about.
I'd like to just repeat one thing that Dr. Birol mentioned to the launch event for the Global Methane Pledge. I mean, this is a big deal. What is being discussed now, if you implement this in full, this 30% reduction in methane emissions from all sources, then that has the same impact on warming mid-century as immediately going to net zero sources of energy for all the world's cars, all the world's trucks, all the world's ships, and all the world's planes. I mean, that is huge. And so we need to really keep a big, be very aware of the size of the prize here. And those are the sorts of messages that we will be delivering to energy ministers around the world.
So slowing warming by that magnitude while we make progress on actually decarbonizing transportation, shipping, right? And
we're not trying to say that this is
right.
in any sense a substitute for acting on the real transport emissions, but we're just trying to give a sense of what's in play here for global efforts to slow warming and reverse it.
Sure. So Tim, of course, the pledge today, the report that you all did just a few weeks ago that talked about, the roadmap, if you will, for countries and companies. But this is not the first time that you folks have been talking about this issue. I remember the report you first issued in 2017, when if you came to COP, no one was talking about methane emissions, but yet you and your team were beginning to talk about this. When did you first become aware of this opportunity? You were very early in your understanding of this.
So I've been at the IEA for over 10 years now, and it's been pretty much a constant. I mean, it's certainly increased in intensity over that time, but quite early on we were talking about the importance of tackling methane in the shale industry. That was back in 2012, if I'm not mistaken. And we've always, when we've looked at measures that can accelerate action, so things that can get us on track for Paris, we've always highlighted the opportunity to invest in renewables, to improve energy efficiency, to do various other things that we rightly consider as pillars of the transition. But alongside that, you will always find reducing methane emissions from fossil fuel operations as one of those huge near-term opportunities. So that's been very much a constant in our thinking. And let's give credit where it's due. I mean, a lot of that thinking has come from the opportunity to speak to you, to Steve Hamburg, to colleagues at EDF, who have, helped us through the science and helped us formulate some of this in a way that really speaks to both the energy debate and speaks to the energy ministers who are our constituency as well.
Well, thank you for that, but I would also thank you for being, open and receptive to new sources of information, new ways of looking at the issue. I think sometimes the International Energy Agency doesn't get enough credit for your ability, your capacity, and your interest in getting perspectives from a diverse universe of stakeholders. Right, not just the energy industry. So I give you credit for that.
Well, I appreciate that. I mean, we're certainly speaking and listening to as many people as we can. I mean, one very interesting new source of data that we're paying a lot of attention to is also the additional insights you can get from aerial observations, from satellite data. From that, for us, and obviously that's an effort which EDF is heavily involved in as well. That's going to be a very important new source of transparency on the sources of leaks, on what can be done more, especially in countries that maybe didn't sign up for
Yep.
the pledge today. That we need to find new ways to broaden that coalition further. And I think transparency is a very important part of that. Continued diplomatic efforts are a very important part. And I think let's not forget the importance of industry leadership as well. Because if we can get also companies involved, talking to their joint venture partners, talking to their non-operated joint venture partners, that's going to be an important part of this picture as well.
So, and of course, Secretary Kerry ended today's presentation with the hint that the document remains open, right? And maybe even by the end of this COP in 10 days' time, we'll see even more signatories to this, and that would be a great thing. So, one final question I have for you, Tim, because so here you are at the Methane Pavilion. We no doubt have an audience of millions, if not billions, right now. What advice would you give to folks in industry, those folks in the investor-owned oil companies, the national oil companies who are watching all this, seeing countries sign up to this methane pledge, hearing that the low-hanging fruit is in the oil and gas sector? What advice would you give to them about how they should be thinking about this issue now and how they should be proceeding going forward?
So I think there's two things. One is that there's a huge range at the moment in company performance. In our view, there are leading companies that have shown this can be done. And if you talk to them, one of the messages that you will get back is that actually this turned out to be, in many senses, easier and more cost-effective than we had even anticipated when we went down that road. So I think the first is, there are ways, there are proven ways to make this happen. And so I think it really needs to be at the forefront of any, forward-thinking participant in the oil and gas industry to move down that road. And the second one is more of a warning, because transparency is coming.
Yep.
And large leaks are already visible from space. Our ability to track that will become even better when MethaneSat is launched and when some other initiatives are in a sense up in the air. So there's an opportunity there, but there's also, I think, a very strong, not just a reputational risk, but I think a commercial risk for companies involved. And because consumers, those who are buying your products, will be able to see. And I think that it is legitimate to expect that people bringing hydrocarbons to market, that they will be judged not just on that product, but also how it's produced and whether it's responsibly produced.
Particularly when and in fact the world knows, that it doesn't have to be this way, right? Yeah. There's no reason why methane pollution is inherent to oil and gas production. Finding and fixing leaks, making sure that you're not venting or flaring, replacing older equipment that's designed to vent or leak. All of this is within the industry's power to address.
I think that's exactly right. I mean, carbon dioxide emissions in a sense are a function, a design flaw in the energy system as it exists today. I mean, clearly we are trying as fast as we can to move away from that. But methane emissions, they're not intrinsic, as you say, they are really a question of good above ground management of an industry. And I think that means that's one of the reasons why they can be tackled very, very quickly, and they must be tackled very, very quickly.
So a solvable problem, a huge opportunity, and some concrete paths forward. So Tim, I just want to thank you for bringing us a little bit of that message of hope. It's a great way to add to what has been a great day here at COP with the announcement of the global Methane Pledge, and very much looking forward to working with you and your colleagues at IEA as we move now from commitment to action. So thank you for being here.
Great pleasure. Thanks very much, Matt.